Everybody, welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's Tuesday. If you're new to this podcast, please hit subscribe on YouTube and also visit santabarbaratalks.com. Consider making a contribution to support these podcasts. I want to first, before we get going, just sort of give a mention to Santa Barbara City Council member Eric Friedman, who, as I understand it, is doing better. He's recovering. He had a heart attack over the weekend, and fortunately, he was surrounded by people who were able to help him perform CPR. He got the medical care that he needed, and he's on the road to recovery. The city council canceled the meeting this week out of respect for him, which was a very smart decision. Eric's one of the bright lights, shining stars of that council. So smart, offers so much perspective, always good for a quote, literary reference, historical reference, and just like an incredible addition to that council and has been for several years. So thoughts and prayers to you, Eric, and hope to see you out there soon. And I'm glad that you're recovering and doing well. So we'll see you soon. Let's transition now into the things I want to talk about. Is I kind of want to go over kind of a top five list of some stories that I've written in recent days, sort of behind the stories, the story behind the story. And I want to start off with what's in the news today, which is this cookie plug situation. Downtown Santa Barbara, cookie plug Santa Barbara. They, on Friday, got a letter from Ed France from the city who basically said, hey, we're not going to enter a new lease agreement with you. And this was stunning. This was really devastating to Annette Rodriguez, who is the owner of Cookie Plug. Now, there's a lot going on. You can read my story in Newshawk to get all the details. I'm not going to go over everything here. But as journalists, we have this sort of sixth sense, just sort of human nature, spidey sense, whatever you want to call it. But it seems like I don't have all the pieces here, that not all the information has been shared. Cookie Plug opened up a year ago and they sell these designer cookies. They're sort of a hip hop culture, urban culture vibe. Started out in New York. It is a franchise, but Annette Rodriguez put in $12,000 of her own design work into this building. This paint, the walls are colored and decorated in this urban culture, Notorious B.I.G., sort of this streetscape, this urbanscape. And she renovated the building. She did all this stuff. Over $100,000 comes in. She was on a sublease with Metropolitan Theaters Corporation. And of course, as we know, they filed for bankruptcy protection and they are out. And the city did not renew their lease. And the city then decided to enter a lease with the Santa Barbara International Film Festival for this space. Now, the film festival's next door, they're turning that to the film center. But there's actually all one building in terms of the infrastructure that the city owns. There's the film center building, there's the Cookie Plug building, and then there's the former 805 University building. They're gone, by the way. They left right after their lease expired. So that's been a vacant building. So now Cookie Plug gets notice that they have to leave. Well, they had a 6-year lease with Metropolitan that went through 2029. And now they're told, well, because this lease with MTC is canceled, you're canceled also. So Annette Rodriguez is saying, well, we were talking about that. They assured me we weren't going to get canceled. And then all of a sudden, they get this letter on Friday from Ed France saying, sorry, you got to be out in 3 weeks by the end of April. And good luck in your future endeavors. Okay. So Annette is angry. She's upset. She had this lease. The thing is, they're not like they say the city says they don't have any plans for it. Now, meanwhile, the film center has to do this big renovation. They're gonna overhaul everything in there, the electric, the plumbing, the infrastructure to make it more modern and up to date. Anyone who had ever been to the Fiesta 5 theaters knows it was not exactly a pleasant experience. So they are going to change all that and sort of wondering out loud here is if maybe there's an effort to get a different tenant in there next to the film festival. Maybe they don't want any tenant in there while this renovation is going on because there is connected pipes and plumbing because it is all one building. And so what does that mean? And then you just kind of have to wonder once that film center gets going and the film festival is such a popular sort of international branded reputation in town, are they going to want some other style of restaurant there or shop or wine tasting or coffee or lounge or something? I mean, I don't know. I did talk to Roger. He said Roger Durling from the film festival. He did say he did no idea what was going on. So that was what he said. Annette Rodriguez certainly feels that it's odd. She's a successful business, and they're basically saying you got to go with no explanation for it after the city approved their long-term lease with MTC. Even though it was a sublease, the city still had to approve who that sublease was. And so something sort of doesn't feel right. Ed France is sort of just saying with the city, he's the downtown parking and plaza manager. Apparently he handles leases now or communication with downtown leases. And so he's just sort of saying, we decided not to enter into a lease, period, and not going into any kind of details there. Now, Annette Rodriguez is local. Her mother is Joanne Keynes. She grew up in the community. This is outrageous. It's leaving a terribly bad taste in her mouth in terms of how the city of Santa Barbara is treating her. This is a popular cookie shop downtown, and it's young. It's vibrant, it's urban, all those things that the city of Santa Barbara says it is supposed to be inviting and welcoming to Santa Barbara. You know, we got rid of the cars. It's basically a bike boulevard now in the middle of State Street, and this place is within that theme. It's like a young kind of person's place, but for whatever reason, they're gone after she thought she'd be there till 2029. So more to come on this story, but check it out in newshawk.com. You can visit, obviously, Cookie Plug social media as well. She's telling the story, but it's definitely a very sort of, shall we say, more to come because not all the information is being shared for sure. Okay, I want to also talk to you about. I guess I'm doing kind of a top five list. I'm doing them in reverse order. Second one, this downtown march in Santa Barbara. Wow, there were thousands and thousands of people, and I've been covering all the marches. I've been covering all the marches for years. This was the largest one I've ever been a part of. I myself estimated like at least 4 to 5 thousand people there. It's hard to know because when you're amid that many people, you can't really see everyone. And even though there was a drone shot at the beach where everybody ended, that was not everybody who was protesting who was down in Del Oro Plaza. So those numbers are actually a lot larger. So this was shoulder to shoulder. This was highly uncomfortable if you're trying to like be in the crowd. But me working as a journalist, photos, reporting, this was an amazing event, amazing feeling to be a part of because the groups worked together and they coordinated. And so I've got a ton of photos on my Instagram, Motown Josh News, also at Newshawk, where I write for, and just, you know, you can see them everywhere. And it was such an incredible scene to see all the grass covered at Deligero Plaza and all the street covered and everything on the side there leading up to State Street. And then this massive march all the way downtown, down to the beach. And then they arranged in this hands-off formation and they had a drone shot over the top. So it was incredible, you know, regardless of what you think. I mean, I think obviously most of Santa Barbara is in support of these protesters against the administration. But regardless of whether you are or not, you gotta respect all these people coming out and speaking how they feel. It's so amazing, and you're not going to get that kind of crowd with anything else really. So that was pretty huge to sort of see that. Okay, La Cumbre Plaza. All right, this is why we needed a specific plan. And if anyone who reads my News Talk stories knows that I've talked about that quite a bit. We've got two different projects. We've got Sears building, which is something like 443 apartments, and then the old Macy's building and all that parking lot and the dip and part of the parking lot above. It's almost 700 units all coming together at one time, and the city has to field these developments one on one, separate. And as we saw at the Planning Commission last week, it's not pretty because you've got each of the developers that are trying to get there first. They want to build as many apartments as they can, and there are a lot of community impacts, a lot of concerns. We saw the Hope School District superintendent speak and talk about this means 18 new classrooms. This could be such a big impact on schools. And then, of course, we've got already that area is totally congested with traffic. So, of course, we need the housing. The question is not about whether we need the housing. The question is, what's the best way to pursue that housing to get the most affordability in that for people who actually can who work in the community, not just have people who are ultra rich be able to be able to rent these units. So how do we increase the affordability, and then also how do you integrate that with all of the community's needs, the neighborhood needs in terms of transportation, circulation, and of course the city is working on this. It's not like they don't have amazing planners who are working on all of this, but it would be an even more amazing effort if they were able to plan the two all at once and think about ways that the community can get the most impacts, the community can get, sorry, get the community get the most benefits, the community can get the most affordability. You know, right now, if you drive through La Cumbre Plaza, it is private property, of course, but you know, you can enter on one side, out the other. You can park, you can walk any number of places on either side. You can go to Bristol Farms, you can go to Islands. These are just places I go. See's Candy, occasionally Macy's. You know, it's free to like roam around. Well, under this new development, like they're cutting it off. So if you're part of the one half of the development, you like don't have access to the other side. And then they want to make sure that there's only designated entrances into each side. I mean, that's chaos, right? And so even though it's a private development, now it still operates as a very, very public space for circulation. And so without a specific plan, they're basically asking the developers to work together. This was the Kennedy Wilson project, and the Planning Commission really laid into them and said, you got to do better because uh, there's a lot of issues with affordability, with circulation, with traffic, with talking to the other developers. It's quite a big deal. And, you know, we need the housing, but I'll never know. I'll be on my deathbed, I'm sure, and I will, I'll never know. I will grow old, older, whatever, wondering why a specific plan was not developed for this site. And you can read all my newshawk coverage on all the behind the scenes sabotage that went into wrecking that from a certain supervisor who is no longer in office. Okay, so read all up about that. All right. The other thing I wrote about recently is, you know, there's been this huge dispute at 215 Bath Street where the property owners essentially served tenants with eviction notices. And the city stepped in and said these eviction notices were improperly served. Okay. It has led to this massive multi-finger pointing sort of thing that is going on where there are unlawful detainers that are now against some of the tenants. A lot of the tenants have moved out. They took tenant relocation assistance and much more. There's three buildings. One of the buildings has international students who are in it. Lots of bad blood. The tenants have been very obviously seeking media attention in a variety of formats. You know, these are their homes. This is where they live. And then you've got a property owner who comes in and says, we need to renovate these buildings, and bring them up to code, bring them up to speed, make them basically modern because they're going to rent them out to new people. And that's the problem with Santa Barbara's infrastructure, the housing. You know, a lot of these units are 100 years old. And so they're saying, we're going to move you out, we're going to evict you, and then we're going to do all the repairs, and then we're going to increase the rent. Well, if you rented there before, you're not going to be able to likely afford the amount they're going to increase it to, which is going to be more than how much it would have gone up, you know, about 10% year to year. So this whole thing got totally out of hand. And so these tenants, and we want to really simplify this because it's hard to imagine being in this. Like, one of the things that I think the landlords and the property owners struggle with is they might be so far removed from what it's like to be a renter, to be somebody who is struggling to pay the rent. And I'm not talking about just like the logical, like the balancing the budget. Like obviously everyone understands if you have a certain amount of money and most of that money goes to one thing, that definitely squeezes you and it stresses your quality of life if you don't have money for other things. Like you get that. But for these tenants, it's very jarring. It's traumatic to get an eviction notice, right? It's like you've got to move. Think about what that's like on the inside for them. And yes, you can go into all the specific cases and all the specific individuals and say this and that. But the bottom line is where you live, that's the most important thing that a person has in this world, right? It's a place to feel safe. And when you have to move out, it is traumatic. So you can't blame any of the tenants for getting upset, angry, wanting to fight back. Many of the tenants have worked with the Legal Aid Foundation who have defended them. And so we had this whole thing. The city got involved and said, you did these illegally and we're going to prosecute you. And that sent shockwaves throughout the development community because they're like, wait a minute, if we try to renovate our buildings, are we going to get prosecuted if we don't serve the right paperwork? And city was basically saying, yes, you are. And so the city and this property owner, James Knapp, and there's a couple other property owners there, they came to, but they only prosecuted Knapp. They basically said, we're going to put you on probation. You're going to need to be perfect. If you do anything wrong from this point forward, we're going to pursue charges. And they're like, okay, well, we're not going to do anything wrong either. So that's basically like this compromise that says, and you've got to be able to provide an on-site manager and you've got to give the tenants a number and they need to be able to feel like they have access and you need to take care of the building. And so they reach this sort of compromise. And I think most of the tenants are comfortable with it from what I've heard. Not all of them are. Some of them wanted to see it go further and see a trial and see what would happen, and that's not going to happen. Meanwhile, we still have these unlawful detainers that are going on. But I got to say, these situations are complicated because on one hand, the logic is, well, sure, if you're going to invest all this money and renovate a building, obviously you're going to need to get it back. And so you can't just charge what you were charging before. That makes total sense. But you have to factor in other things when you're thinking about this. You have to factor in the human impact of renovating, whatever you want to call it. You lose longtime residents in a community over time, that hurts the community. Over time, we have less wisdom, less experience, less historical knowledge, fewer people in the community who believe in the community. We don't want to just make everything super nice and have the highest bidder come in and rent because we lose so much of what makes Santa Barbara special. Now, so you say, well, Josh, what are we supposed to do then? Not try to renovate these buildings, and it's going to be worse. These people are going to be living in these horrible conditions. There's obviously a middle ground there. We don't want people living in these sort of conditions. At the same time, it's better to have a place to live than it is to have no place to live. So there has to be some empathy and some effort there. And of course, the UCSB, housing situation impacted by students. It's kind of a hard pill to swallow when you have students, when you have people coming in from out of Santa Barbara and displacing locals because they can pay more in rent. That just doesn't feel right. And then you've got locals who are pushed out. Not everybody who grew up in Santa Barbara is rich or wealthy. In fact, most of us were not. Okay. Most of us do not have parents who owned homes. My parents never owned a thing. Okay. We rented. And so you think about the locals who grew up here, the same ones we're advocating for in the school districts, right? Those same kids at Santa Barbara High, DP, San Marcos, even earlier in the elementary and junior high schools, those kids who were trying to like boost up through the housing market, we're sort of saying, unless your parents own property, these apartments are going to be for the highest bidder. And That's just not fair. You lose so much. We care about the community. We have these memories. We have the memories of what it was like on the east side, on the west side, before that latest development, before that latest business. We know what it's like to walk on Goleta Beach, to walk on the east side on Milpa Street, on State Street, on Cabrillo Boulevard, to cross the overpass over Highway 101 to get from the west side to the east side. We know what that is like. And a lot of these new people, they don't know what that's like. They just sort of see it as, well, that beach behind me. And that beach behind me is Goleta Beach. And there's things about this beach that only locals know. And we don't want to lose that. And so this whole renovation, 215 Bass Street, is about something much bigger than just these tenants and whether we think they should take the money or not and move. This is going on in other parts of the community. We don't want to demonize the landlords. Some of the landlords are local and they are trying their best. They're saying if we're not going to do this, these out of town corporations are going to come in and they will really not care. So there needs to be some compromise, working together, holding hands, and figuring out a way to do all of this together. But when push comes to shove, err on the side of human emotions, people, and impacts. We don't want to put people out on the street because they can't afford new rents. And there's only so many places to rent in Santa Barbara that are affordable. Well, that thing Peter Lewis built on State Street, that's not affordable for anyone who grew up here. In fact, UCSB bought it, so it's going to be a bunch of, teachers and staff, which is fine, but it's not the people we talk and say we need to help. So that's still in flux, but that was another story that had a lot of conversation last week. Finally, last one. I love being a journalist because there's these big stories that I've been talking about that, you sniff around, you poke around, you find them. They just kind of pop up somehow on their own and you got to follow them. But I wrote about the Taco Bell on the east side on Milpa Street and how the Historic Landmarks Commission decided not to designate it as a structure of merit because they added this fourth arch at some point, I think in the 90s. And so that took away from the historical character. Otherwise, that building was from 1965, still has the bell. So the thing love about journalism is that there's all kinds of different stories. And we have 7 news values that determine what makes something a story. Obviously, conflict. If there's conflict, it's a story, right? If there's emotions, if we react oh my goodness, if there's impact, like an earthquake or something big, those rockets that go off almost every day now. There's novelty. If there's something new, that unusual, has never happened before. Okay. There's prominence, celebrities, right? People who are famous or people who do prominent things. That makes something newsworthy, right? And there's proximity. We care about stuff that's local, much more. Okay. And so there's all these things that make something newsworthy. We just don't randomly throw it out there. And this Taco Bell thing is definitely novelty because we have one of the oldest Taco Bells, continuous Taco Bells in existence. And it's right there on Milpa Street. And if you look in there, you go in there and you got that brick facade, you've got the bell, and it's a classic throwback to old time fast food restaurants. Unfortunately, the Historic Landmarks Commission decided that they weren't going to designate it as a structure of merit because it had that fourth arch. But maybe they can revisit it down the road because even though it has that fourth arch, there's so many stories. Again, going back to people who grew up in the community, including some of the HLC members, eating there, right? And it's part of your memory, our collective memory. But they decided not to designate it. But I enjoyed it because I was just looking at the agenda and what is that? Oh, Taco Bell, right? And say what you will about Taco Bell food, every one of us has eaten there, and it's also it's affordable, and some of the stuff you get is healthy. Not everything on that menu is, but you can get stuff that's healthy and it's affordable. And those are good traits. And then here's this Taco Bell right in our community that is from 1965. 5 as we're losing a lot of our collective, conventional, historical knowledge. Okay. So thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Check out all these stories in newshawk.com. You'll get the whole rundown. And yeah, hit subscribe on YouTube. Oh, yeah, tonight I will be at the Santa Barbara Unified School District board meeting because we've got students who are speaking out against Superintendent Hilda Maldonado and the administration. They do not want cuts to the arts, to music, to theater, and they're going to go have a concert. So, protests are one thing, protests with singers who have talent, that's another. So it should be interesting to see how it goes to watch that. All right. Have a great day. SantaBarbaraTalks.com, Motown Josh News on Instagram, and follow, subscribe on YouTube. Have a great day.